What is going on, IF Warriors? So today we're going to talk about why people actually aren't abandoning intermittent fasting, even to the contrary to what people would like for you to believe. Now, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so 2 days ago, I made a video called Why Everyone is Abandoning Intermittent Fasting, and it was really just a rebuttal video to Dr. Brad Stanfield's video of why everyone's abandoning intermittent fasting. Now, that video was more tailored to the studies that he provided to try to show, oh, look, see, there's nothing, beneficial about intermittent fasting. You do caloric restriction and you get the same results. Although all of the studies that he provided, as well as studies in meta-analysis and even studies from the past of a similar structure, randomized control trial using daily caloric restriction versus intermittent fasting, still shows an edge with intermittent fasting when it comes to fat loss, even if it's not statistically significant. They still lose more subcutaneous fat, more abdominal subcutaneous fat, more visceral fat, etc., etc. Waist circumference is reduced more in the intermittent fasting group consistently across all of these studies. If it was granted, even though it's close, even though the numbers are closer, something is happening there because caloric intake is the same between both groups, and it isn't random. It isn't like, well, one study you'll get the daily caloric restriction group getting the lower body fat results, and then the other one you'll get the intermittent fasting, and it'll flip flop. Sometimes you'll get 3 for the intermittent fasting, 2 for the. It never does it that way. It's always the intermittent fasting group that loses more body fat, more visceral fat, more reduction in waist circumference. So we've somewhat debunked that in terms of, if you want to use intermittent fasting, you can. If you want to just do daily caloric restriction, you can. They're both very similar in the sense that you'll lose weight and all of that stuff, and one isn't worse than the other, but one does have a slight edge when it comes to burning body fat. And fair is fair, daily caloric restriction has a slight edge when it comes to retaining lean muscle. So there you have it. So I took that and basically made a rebuttal off of his video in terms of saying that intermittent fasting is essentially useless. It isn't. You burn more body fat with intermittent fasting. But his core argument, or his springboard argument, was that people just don't care about intermittent fasting the way they cared before because it peaked in January of 2020. Now, this is true. It did peak in January of 2020 in terms of the interest within intermittent fasting. Now, keep in mind, before January 2020, around January of 2016, there weren't many videos out there talking about intermittent fasting. In fact, this is one of the first channels in YouTube, period, to be a very exclusively intermittent fasting informational channel. That more channels came after, but this was one of the first channels on YouTube to do that. And I did that back in 2016 of January, and there wasn't many channels out there talking about intermittent fasting on a consistent clip the way they are now. So there was a learning period for a lot of people, but some people, by the time we hit 2020, already understood so much of the facets of intermittent fasting in terms of what they like, what they don't like. They have tried things since back in 2016, 2017, 2018. So there isn't a need for a constant information feeding for those who already do intermittent fasting and do it well, or have done it for so many years. So to think that it just fell off simply because people aren't searching for it anymore is actually a little bit of a reach, because that doesn't necessarily represent people's interest in it. It just represents more people's interest that haven't heard about intermittent fasting or learned about it. It represents their interest, but it doesn't necessarily represent the interest of people who started intermittent fasting before that peak. But even with that being said, let's take a look at the actual Google trend numbers to dive a little bit deeper into what could be happening now with intermittent fasting. Now, Google Trend is my friend. I love Google Trend because it lets me know what people are interested in or what people are becoming interested in. And I always take a look at these intermittent fasting numbers to see, how you guys feel. Now, This is the past 5 years. This is the peak in question here. This is December 29, 2019 to January 4th, 2020. Now, this is the highest peak with a score of 100 based off of this 5-year analysis. A score of 100 means that is the highest peak, period, right, that they've hit. So he's correct. 2020, January is the highest peak. But it's not a peak in the sense of there was a climb to this number or to this interest level. There wasn't a climb. There was a abnormality, a jump, a massive jump to this number here during January of 2020. Now, this massive fall was because this was 2020. What ended up happening around here in March was that we were hit with the pandemic. And the pandemic completely shifted people from caring about weight loss and fitness to caring more about financial stuff, to caring more about what they're going to do for their jobs, more about what they're going to do in terms of the relief programs that were coming from the government, et cetera, et cetera. So more people started caring about that stuff, and less people started caring about fitness as a whole. Now, if we were to write, for example, fitness here, right? Just fitness, period. And we look at the past 5 years, same thing happened with fitness. There was a big jump around January. We get a huge jump here, March 15th, 2021, because of course people were starting to think, oh, maybe I should do some at-home fitness, but then you still get the massive drop. The lowest drop ever, right? You get the lowest drop ever for fitness, and it peaked in 2020. This is the highest that it's ever done right here in 2020. This is fitness, period. So it's almost like you're saying, even if you were trying to make a video about intermittent fasting, you're basically also saying, hey, why are people even interested in fitness at all? Because it peaked in 2020, in early March of 2020. So this is, but the thing that's different is that this doesn't even look like an abnormality, right? Because we have a big jump here, very close to this jump here, and this jump here is close to that one. But then there's a tapering off for the rest of, like, there's nothing else. It doesn't look like it's getting higher. It looks like it's pretty leveled based, right? Fitness as a whole, just fitness, right? But then we go into intermittent fasting, right? We go back to intermittent fasting. And let's look at these numbers right now for intermittent fasting past 5 years. Now, 2018, right? We got 2019 January is at 65 in comparison to all of these other ones. And of course, there was the massive jump. But after the drop, there was an increase again and a slight drop. And then it went back to consistently increasing interest over time. Now, what do I mean by that? In 2021, we're at 51 in January, but then in 2022, we're at 52. So there's more interest the following year than there was the year before. And the taper off that normally happens, because as you pass the summer and you get into the winter, people care less about fitness. That this is seen even in the fitness trajectory. There's going to be a taper off, but the taper off is less. See, it tapers off to 20 as opposed to tapering off to 16. And that trend is still continuing, because when we come to 2023, instead of it being at 52 or 51, it is now at 59. So it's increasing. This 59 is very close to what it was in 2019 at 65 in terms of the importance meter, right? So it could very well, and you can see that there's even an abnormality here in how it's rising during March, going up. So now we're at 43. So you can see that there's going to be probably a taper off that's going to be higher than this 20 when it gets to its absolute bottom before it jumps again in January. And of course, it's jumping because it's New Year's resolution. People are looking into fitness. People find intermittent fasting. But if you notice, it's back on its climb. There was an anomaly spike and a drop because of the pandemic. There was a kind of resetting period, and then it's back on its climb. By next year, it could be literally right on the level or very close to the level of where it was in January of 2019 before the massive super spike that happened in January 20. And in 2019, it was all about intermittent fasting. So it could get very, very close to these levels by next year if the trajectory continues. And that's what we've seen in the last 3 years, 2021, 2022, and 2023. So it is misleading to say it spiked. It did spike, but it spiked in an abnormal way. Nothing is even near this. This is not like how fitness is. There's close spikes to the fitness interest with other years and Januaries and other times and interest, but there's nothing even close. So this was an anomaly spike. And then, of course, it was a massive fall. Could it have continued to spike and go even further hot into the stratosphere if it wasn't for the pandemic that shifted everyone's focus? That's possible, but we don't know. One thing that we do know is that there is literally, definitely a resurgence as interest is growing over time and getting close to the very massive and very important 2019 numbers. So, once again, guys, the appeal to authority fallacy. Do not simply listen to somebody simply because they tell you something and they're a doctor or an MD or whatever, because those you could simply appeal to authority simply because of the position that they're in. But when you actually research the stuff and you get to the nitty gritty, you could actually kind of break everything apart and see where we are in reality. What's the actual the temperature of the community? And it looks like with intermittent fasting that year over year, it's actually resurging. People are caring about intermittent fasting again, and it's happening where every year is more powerful than the year before, and it's about to get close to the year that we had in 2019. So hopefully this video has helped you guys. Now, this is not about looking at the studies. If you want to look at the video where I talk about the study and how intermittent fasting always carries a slight edge when it comes to body fat using his own studies from that video, go ahead and click this video right here and I'll break it down perfectly for you. Okay, until the next one, guys, thank you very much. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace out.